News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. Coming up, any minute now, Parliament will hold the latest vote in the row about second jobs. Should they be banned or not? And a dysfunctional, broken merry-go-round. That's how Priti Patel has called the UK's asylum system. But what should we do about it? And Northern Ireland has today voted in vaccine passports. Do you celebrate this or see it as a cause for concern? And in Charlotte, Britain, some of them have been sent to prison today. Thank God, that's what I say. But do you agree with me? We'll have all that and more coming up. But first, the news headlines.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has been giving evidence today to the Commons Liaison Committee amid the ongoing row over members of Parliament having second jobs. Boris Johnson said he recognised that action was needed and called for cross-party reforms on progress. He also accepted it was a mistake to conflate the events surrounding Owen Paterson's suspension for lobbying with the case for reform.
So the intention genuinely was not to exonerate anybody. The intention was to see whether there was some way in which, on a cross-party basis, we could improve the system. Now, in retrospect, it was obviously mistaken to think that we could conflate the two things. And do I regret that decision? Yes, I certainly do, Mr. Brown.
A British F-35 pilot from HMS Queen Elizabeth ejected during routine flying operations in the Mediterranean this morning. The incident happened at around 10 o'clock, with the MOD saying the pilot has now been safely returned to ship and an investigation is underway. The Royal Navy flagship is returning to the UK from its maiden deployment, which included exercises with the Indian military. Vaccine passports will become mandatory to enter many hospitality venues in Northern Ireland by the end of this month. From the 29th of November, to be precise, passports will be needed to gain entry to nightclubs, hospitality premises, including cinemas, theatres and conference halls. COVID certificates would also be needed to access indoor events with more than 500 attendees. A bomb disposal vehicle has arrived near to Sutcliffe Street, one of the addresses believed to be connected to the Liverpool bomber Imad al-Swalmin. Police have extended the cordon around the property as they investigate materials found inside. Counter-terror police say al-Swalmin had been planning his attack since April. He blew himself up in a taxi outside a maternity hospital in Liverpool on Sunday. Officers say the 32-year-old was born in Iraq and had had episodes of mental illness. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says Britain's dysfunctional asylum system meant he was able to remain in the country after his application had been rejected. The cost of living has surged to its highest rate in almost 10 years. New data reveals that inflation rose to 4.2% in October, mainly due to rising fuel and energy costs. The Consumer Price Index measure of inflation is now more than double the Bank of England's target. The bank says it may have to increase interest rates in the coming months to tackle the problem. And 9 Insulate Britain activists have received jail sentences ranging from 3 to 6 months for breaching a High Court injunction preventing them from blocking roads. The High Court has so far issued 5 injunctions banning road blocking protests on the M25, around the Port of Dover and on major London roads. Insulate Britain activist Tracy Mallaghan spoke outside the Royal Courts of Justice after sentencing, criticising the government.
Your government has now chosen to act, and it's chosen to imprison us rather than meet the demand. By imprisoning us, the government shows its cowardice. They would rather lock up pensioners than insulate their homes. They would rather lock up teachers than create thousands of proper jobs. They would rather lock up young people than take practical steps to reduce our emissions.
TikTok is doing a series of updates to its safety measures to better protect young people on the platform. The video sharing giant says it will improve the language used in its warning labels on viral challenges, along with the way it warns users over hoaxes linked to suicide or self-harm. They say that's because researchers found so-called alarmist warnings can exacerbate the problem. An Arizona man who wore a furry hat with horns while storming the US Capitol building has been sentenced to 41 months in prison. Jacob Chansley, a self-styled QAnon shaman, was photographed in the Senate chamber with a flagpole topped with a spear. Chansley had admitted to being one of the first 30 pro-Trump rioters to stream into the Capitol building and had pled guilty to a charge of obstructing an official proceeding. Here, Her Majesty the Queen has held her first official face-to-face engagement since missing the Remembrance Sunday service. She held an audience with General Sir Nick Carter, the Chief of the Defence Staff at Windsor Castle. The Queen, who's 95 years old, had been following advice by doctors to rest. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now let's get back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, keeping me company tonight, we've got Joe Phillips, journalist and political commentator, and Alan Miller, who's the co-founder of campaign group Open for All, and journalist and author Harriet Sargent. Good evening to all of you. And you know the drill by now, don't you? I like your thoughts on all the topics that we discussed tonight, and let me know as well if there's anything that I should be discussing that I've missed. You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. Now, our top story, Boris Johnson was questioned at a liaison committee this afternoon. The Prime Minister faces the panel of senior MPs 3 times a year. Johnson has said that there was no question that the Tory MP Owen Paterson had fallen foul of the rules and that it was a mistake to try and overhaul the disciplinary procedures for MPs. You don't say.
I think it was a mistake 2 weeks ago to conflate the very sad and difficult case of a particular colleague who'd fallen foul of the Commissioner for Standards and the Standards process, and the need for, as many colleagues saw it, rightly or wrongly, for reform and improvement to the system, and in particular to the system for appeals in the event of very difficult cases. And what I hoped to achieve was some sort of cross-party progress on that. Plainly that wasn't possible. What I would like to see now is cross-party progress on endorsing some of the, I think, very useful conclusions of the independent report on the report of the Independent Committee on Standards and Privileges of 2018.
Goodness me, I hope you are still awake after listening to that. So why it takes politicians so long just to basically say I was wrong is beyond me. Anyway, earlier as well today during Prime Minister's questions, the opposition leader Keir Starmer called Johnson a coward.
That's not an apology. Everybody else has apologised for him, but he won't apologise for himself. A coward, not a leader. When somebody in my party misbehaves, I kick them out. When somebody in his party misbehaves, he tries to get them off the hook. I lead, he covers up.
Well, at the committee today, they covered a whole host of topics, but I'm going to focus in on one of them, which is about the second jobs. I mean, you've been under a rock, haven't you, recently? If you've not heard the conversations about should politicians be allowed a second job or not, and if so, what type? Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, joins us now. Darren, talk us through what's happening in Parliament as we speak about that topic.
Well, first of all, of course, the Prime Minister got a proper kicking there, didn't he, from Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's question time. I think even his most loyal supporters would have concluded he didn't do spectacularly well there. He then spent all afternoon eating humble pie in front of those senior MPs, having to admit, essentially, that he had made mistakes when it came to the Owen Paterson affair. And then in the last hour or so, Michelle, he's been in front of his own Conservative MPs, in which he said, apparently, that on a clear road, I crashed the car into a ditch over the Paterson affair. So a very contrite, it must be said, Boris Johnson. May have taken him weeks to get here, but at least he's admitted his mistakes today. But you're right in pointing out MPs have also spent this afternoon in the Commons debating how to kind of resolve the furore that's kind of blowing up over all of this, not least on second jobs. Labour have put forward a motion which they say they want to see all second jobs banned for MPs. Essentially, apart from very limited cases, like if you're a doctor or a nurse or you work in the public sector. The Conservative Party not going quite as far as that. They're saying they want kind of second jobs banned if you're a consultant or a lobbyist, and also some type of ability to ensure that MPs spend the majority of their time actually being MPs, rather than, let's say, other MPs going off and doing other things in their second jobs. So that vote is going to happen in the next hour or so. It's going to be really interesting to see whether the Labour motion passes. I think it's pretty unlikely. Labour will then, of course, try and make political capital out of the fact that they think the Tories aren't being hard enough on so-called corruption and sleaze. But it's been a very, very, very difficult day for the Prime Minister, and it must be said, a day that, frankly, he has largely brought about himself.
Indeed. And just before I let you go, hopefully I will update our viewers on the outcome of the vote. But what happens after we've had that vote? What's the next step?
So the next step, I mean, it depends how it goes, but if the Conservative Party get their motion passed, which almost certainly will happen, given the majority, they will then try and work on this kind of cross-party basis to come up with a new set of rules on that area of second jobs, and also on trying to ensure MPs do their job as MPs. Would not expect anything by the end of this year. So slightly kicking into the long grass. Again, one of the criticisms of the Labour Party is that that's why the Conservative motion, they're not necessarily in favour of it. They don't think it goes far enough, and it means that this thing just will roll into 2022, and that the pressure there to try and sort it out quickly will not be there.
Darren McCaffrey, thank you. Joe Phillips, your view?
Well, I completely agree with what Darren said and what you've just said, Michelle. This is entirely of the Prime Minister's own making. And yes, he's very good at standing there, you know, like a dirty schoolboy with grubby knees going, oh, sorry, wah, 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 didn't do my homework, wah, 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 promise to do better next time. This man is the Prime Minister. He is the leader of this country. It has taken him 2 weeks to recognise that this was an absolutely stupid mistake. What he's done is not only damaged the Conservative Party, he's hugely damaged the role of Parliament, and he's very much damaged democracy, because I think this makes people think, oh, all politicians, they're in it for themselves. I'm not interested in any of them, and I think that's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I suspect that people have had that view about politicians way before this Owen Paterson debacle, I would suggest. Harriet, what's your view?
Well, I'm quite keen for MPs to have second jobs, because the thing about MPs that's different from the rest of us is they can get thrown out of their jobs like that every 5 years. And I think it's fair that they're able to have something bubbling away on the side. I mean, mean, they can't all become like, take up ballroom dancing like Ed Balls on Strictly. So I think that would be fair. Otherwise, we might have to end up paying them a huge amount of money to make up for it. But we need to be, as this whole thing has shown, we need to be much, much more transparent and clear what the second jobs entail. I mean, if you try and go and look on the register where they're meant to fill out what they're actually doing...
The register of interests.
You can't, thank you. You can't. It's very difficult to work out what anybody's doing. So it must be more transparent. I mean, so many, you've got people being ministers, taking decisions that affect private companies and then wafting 5 minutes later into a highly paid job in that private company. I mean, that's outrageous. That has to stop.
But surely that's what you've just said they need to do, is to have something bubbling away so that when the big job goes, they can step into something.
Yes, but we've got to know what it is.
But the problem is, I mean, there are very clear rules. There is nothing to stop you being an advisor. You're not supposed to be a lobbyist, but there's nothing to stop you being an advisor or a consultant. Well, that's a very flimsy veil over being a lobbyist and being an advisor or consultant. And it does seem to me that, yes, of course, we need people coming into Parliament who have come from different walks of life, because otherwise you just get professional politicians. But actually what you need to do is say, yes, if you need to carry on working as a doctor, like Rosina Allen-Khan, MP for Tooting, who still works and does emergency shifts, if you're a lawyer and you need to keep up the hours in order to retain your licence, that's fine. But this idea that you are actually being paid to advise somebody because of you being an MP is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
It's so open to corruption. But I mean, just taking up your point about professional politicians, this is another reason why I would prefer that they had jobs, because I've seen so many of these young men, they come in as in think tanks, they become special advisors, and it's all in one tiny area of Westminster. And they never appear, and then they become MPs, but they never appear to breathe the real world.
Well, Alan, to me, it's very simple. If you're going to be an MP, that should be your first and foremost duty. It is a duty. It's not even a job. It's a duty. A public servant, it is your primary role, or at least it should be. What I would do if I was Prime Minister or in charge of all these rules, I'd say, right, this has to be your priority. You are allowed to do a second job if there is no conflict of interest between that and your Parliament, your parliamentary work. And I would apply a cap to it and say, there's only so many working hours in the month. You're only allowed to dedicate X% over and above your work to that job. There you go, Boris Johnson. I shall invoice you for my consultancy services. I fixed it in a nanosecond. But what's your thoughts on that? Don't you think that's sensible?
I think it is sensible. I think, but actually I think if you're going to do a job, you do it properly. And really, if you can do one job really very well, that would be great. If you look back at the history, in the Labour Party, they used to have all sorts of people from all sorts of professions. A lot of working people, steel workers, builders and others, they don't have that anymore. Similarly, in the Conservative Party, one of the concerns is that if you speak to most ordinary people, £82,000 a year is not chump change. It's not what you might get in the commercial sector, but the idea that you're going to have your attention focused and dedicated to causes, you're going to work with your constituents and you're going to be able to address the issues. Many of the things we've seen, by the way, have been issues that have around the lockdown, around PPE and other issues like that as well, where all sorts of things have been agreed and deals done. And actually, what we've needed to see in the last 20 months is much more parliamentary debate, actually scrutiny amongst MPs, transparency, and we've actually seen the reverse. So I agree. I think that really, actually, if you're going to do a job, you should be doing it properly. Can't imagine going into work and saying, sorry, I've had to do my other job and I can't really deliver in the way I should be now.
I don't know, actually. If my boss is watching, I wouldn't mind doing this job from some lovely island somewhere. I think I could make that work.
I'll be there. I'm happy to join you then.
Yeah, well, let's all do that. Let's go to a beautiful tax haven and I'll broadcast from there, no problem. Keir Starmer, by the way, I showed you that clip of him calling Boris Johnson a coward. He was forced to withdraw that, by the way. This is because of the Commons Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and what Starmer went on to say is, I withdraw it, but He is no leader. Adrian, one of our viewers, has got in contact with us saying, never mind MPs, why should they be the ones voting about whether or not they can have other jobs? Why aren't we, the public, voting on it? He goes on to say, we need another election. Brian on email says, well, we can all lose jobs at short notice and MPs want a 5-year contract. If being an MP is so difficult, then how on earth can you find time to be all these other things as well? Interesting. Someone else has said, why do you wait for any opportunity to pounce on the government? Well, I've got to be honest with you, it's not. Yeah, I was going to say, it's not. I mean, you know, I think it'd be slightly odd to see some of the things that are going on and not wish to comment upon them. I have to say, I do think it's important that we hold our politicians to a good standard, irrespective of which party they represent. And anyone that watched that Owen Paterson debacle, where they basically tried to fudge the rules to get somebody off that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been off, anyone, I suspect, shouldn't be happy with that. But get in touch and let me know your thoughts. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs. Now, coming up, we'll be talking about the COVID vaccine passports. Got to say, a bit of a topic which divides opinion. And one member of my panel, this one to my left, organised a protest against them outside Parliament today. We'll be talking about that and looking at what's going on in some of the other countries as well. Can't resist that. I'm thinking, of course, in Austria. Goodness me. We'll be back very soon.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, COVID passports, what is your position on those? Are you one of those people that think that they're absolutely necessary? Are you someone that's furious about them, or are you a little bit in the middle? I mean, these things are happening all over the place now, and Northern Ireland was the latest place to vote them in, starting at the end of this month. That happened today. And speaking of today, there was a protest on Parliament Square this afternoon opposing them being potentially introduced in England. The Together Declaration was supported by a variety of MPs, including Sir Graham Brady, Steve Baker, Chris Green, and many of the others. I'm just going to have a quick look at Steve Baker. I know he was talking on that this afternoon. Let's have a look.
I think it doesn't matter which party you vote for, your party would normally tell you they stood up for freedom and human rights. And the Conservative Party in particular would say it was a party of freedom and responsibility. Well, if we're a party of freedom and responsibility, we've got to actually do those things in practice. So I would say, particularly to Conservative voters, but to all voters, tell your politicians you want to live in a free society, one which lives with coronavirus like we live with flu, and that means no test and trace, no vaccine passports, being responsible, getting the vaccination if you want it, which I recommend, and getting on with life.
Northern Ireland there, of course. These things are already in Scotland and in Wales as well. I do laugh when I mention Wales because if you follow this subject, you will know that there was a little bit of what some might call a technicality that got that passed in Wales, but that didn't stop anybody when it came to extending them very recently. Alan Miller, you are a very outspoken, strong, passionate man when it comes to this topic. Tell me why.
Well, a number of reasons, really. I think that the idea, we've never had a discussion about the idea that we had to trade somehow, that you could trade freedom to participate in society. After 20 months of enormous sacrifice, Chris Whitty said we should now be living with a situation like the flu. And yet, at this very juncture, when we're meant to be getting back to normal, certain leaders think the smart idea to be seen to be doing something is to impose measures where strangers ask you to show some of your most intimate details. It's none of anyone's business. It's actually also got nothing to do with health, because as we know, the Prime Minister said it himself that vaccines don't stop transmissions. They will help with serious illnesses and deaths. And also we know from various researches and studies that you can have not had a vaccination, you could have had COVID and you could have very high immunity, 25 to 27 times higher. So actually what we've got is a bit of a performance where it looks like something's being done, but the damage to business on the one hand, which is significant, we've seen 50% of reduction in Scotland since it's happened with the nighttime sector. We've seen in Manhattan where it's there, 60% reduction. But actually to our very fabric of life, to our way of life, the idea of show me your papers, to participate and get on with life, it's utterly wrong. It's illiberal and we shouldn't have it.
Joe?
I'm not sure there's any evidence to suggest that vaccine passports actually do anything. There was a bit of a jump in Scotland amongst young people getting vaccinated because they needed to show them at nightclubs. But there hasn't been anything other than that. And I think, the sheer logistics of standing in a queue outside a nightclub, which I haven't done for very many years, I have to tell you, while somebody's looking to see whether, and is it real or did you get it off the internet or something? I mean, it doesn't actually help. What we need to do is to persuade people properly and sensibly the public health benefits of having a vaccination, because it's not just about you, the individual, it's about the people around you. But I don't think that vaccine passports are the answer. I think travelling abroad and travelling in and out of different countries is a different matter altogether. And, we're all perfectly happy to take, whatever it is, whether it's malaria or yellow fever jabs or whatever is required. But I think in order to go about your daily business and your leisure thing, and as Alan says, the hospitality sector has been absolutely slaughtered. And, it makes a mockery. Well, it made a mockery of Eat Out to Help Out, which, of course, saw a huge increase in coronavirus. Now we seem to be kicking that same industry in the teeth.
We do. Harriet, should we have these vaccine passports?
Well, I'm all for anything that stops me being locked out again. I'm for anything that means I can go out to a nightclub, I can go to a theatre, I can see my friends. I am absolutely passionate that I don't want to be locked up, and if that means
so would you agree to do anything?
Sorry?
Would you agree to do anything then, just as long as you're not locked up?
Yes, I would. If it means showing, it takes 2 minutes to show you. I've come in, I've travelled. It takes 2 seconds to show my that I've been jabbed. And you're saying this is intimate details. I'm sorry, but showing that you've been jabbed is hardly intimate details. I have a lot more intimate details I could show.
But hang on, but what if you're someone who, let's be clear, there's conversations now. Boris Johnson was alluding to the fact, what does it mean to be fully vaccinated? He was alluding to the fact very recently that would be possibly 3 jabs. Now, I'm going to just pull up a tweet if I've got it somewhere. I hope that I can just pull this up for you, because there are people that have got real concerns. So, I don't know, people have had their double vaccinations, and there was a tweet that went out, I think it was yesterday or so, where somebody had raised, can I show this tweet on the screen? I hope I can, yeah. So a guy here, David Atherton, he said, from our well-beating NHS, I'm trying to show you it, but we've moved up so quickly. It's basically what he's saying is, so sorry sorry, I'm trying to read it to you and it's going whoop up the screen. So sorry if you missed that. But long story short, he's asking about the NHS. He's saying he's got 2 jabs, and what's happened now is that when he's gone for his booster, it was a different type of jab. Sajid Javid basically responded and said, and I quote there, you saw his tweet, that was not a made-up tweet, "So what? Learn some respect, basically, for the NHS."
Well, I sort of agree with that. I mean, lots of people who had the AstraZeneca in the first place...
You agree with what?
With the so what? I mean, it doesn't matter what the booster jab
How do you know?
Well, because they've been testing them.
Well, so let's have a little look at this discussion about both your point. It stops us getting locked down. So in Gibraltar, 100% of people have been vaccinated. They're going to have a lockdown, and transmission rates are still going. You've got vaccine passports where, in many countries where they've been used, and we've got lots of what they call cases. They're actually positive tests, which raise another issue anyway. But the very idea that you have this digital certificate, where actually it is the state and individuals can be asked at any time, can ask of you to show me who you are, show me your health papers. They don't actually do the thing we're being told they do in the first place. Many people think, well, maybe if it keeps us safer, stops us being locked down. If we remember this discussion about hospitals, one of the interesting things about vaccinations as well is that many of the people that contracted coronavirus in hospitals often got it from other patients in there, often sometimes when they were vaccinated, because it doesn't stop transmissions, as the Prime Minister has said. Why don't we do some things that are really useful instead of this charade that's damaging to civil liberties? Have single rooms like they do in Germany, right, to separate people in hospitals. Why have we not spent the last 9 months when everyone knew what was coming out? Because every winter we have a similar issue where the NHS is overwhelmed. Why have we not started preparing hospitals? We quickly formed some new hospitals. They were closed down again. Instead, what we have is a combination of a nudge, which has been admitted, right? Let's have a nudge, so we threaten young people so that they go and get a vaccination because they can't participate. And at the same time, something that's very damaging to civil liberties. But also look at Italy and France. In Italy and France now, you can't travel on the public transport, in cafes, in restaurants and bars and
Can't
clubs.
go to the hairdresser in Austria.
And in Austria, they're now locking down people that are
I've got a clip of Austria, by the way, just whilst we're talking. This is what's going on in Austria. Many of you will know that they have locked down the unvaccinated. Look at this. This is it looks like a closed shop, and you've got the police wandering around, making sure that there's nobody in there that are so-called unvaccinated, checking people's... I personally think this is absolutely outrageous. And, Joe, I do need to come back before I move on. You say that you actually agree with Sajid Javid saying, so what? I think it's appalling. I think there will be people that are genuinely concerned. We were asked to have 1 jab. Then we were asked to have 2 jabs. Now we're asked to have 3 jabs. There are people that sit there and go, well, hang on a second, I've had 2, whatever it might be, just say Pfizer or whatever. Well, I've had 2 of these, now you're giving me 1 of these. How safe is this?
The 2 jabs were, I think, in 99% of cases, were the same. So the first 2 were the same vaccine. There's nothing to suggest that the third one, the booster, is any less effective by being a different one. You know, when you
but
go
let me ask you this then. This is because I could talk about this subject all day because I find these things really discriminatory and wrong. If, and just bear with my thinking here, if in order to be regarded as fully vaccinated imminently, you're going to have 3 jabs because they're suggesting that actually you're going to have 3.
And a jab every year after.
Well, they haven't
maybe
said
even
that. They haven't said that.
Yeah, but it's looking like
it may be. But let's stick with what we know at the moment. It's 2 jabs and a booster.
Well,
yeah,
at the moment...
about the booster after 5 to 6 months, because what they're suggesting is that after 5 to 6 months, the immunity. So then, this is where I get confused. So you can only go into places if you are fully vaccinated, i.e. looking likely 3 jabs, because apparently these things only last 6 months. Why then isn't someone that's just had 1 jab 4 months ago, why aren't they classed as vaccinated then? Because if what you're saying, not you, but if what the suggestion and the science is that actually you can only be fully vaccinated after you've had your 3rd one, because apparently this thing is waning, how come 3 months after your first one?
Well, they haven't brought it in yet, except in Scotland and Wales, I think, or Northern Ireland, you said. So, yes, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make any sense because the only people who could have been fully vaccinated are older people at the moment if you take that booster jab, because kids haven't been able to have the booster jab because of the gap between the 2 the 6 months between the second one and the booster. All I would just say is there's only
need to be
one,
very brief,
all right,
by the way,
there's
so I've got
only
another
one
topic.
disease that we've eradicated in the world, and that's smallpox. Everything else we live with through a combination of prevention and protection, whether that's measles or tetanus or rabies, and I think we just need to be a little bit less heated about this. It's a public health issue. It's cost hundreds of thousands of lives, millions worldwide, and we just need to be a little bit sensible about it. And actually...
Well, I think we need to be very sensible about it.
Last point on this as well,
if you look
by
at
the way.
Israel, they're now saying that you do need 3 vaccinations for your vaccine passport. We've also been told that in terms of if you don't have a 3rd vaccination booster, you could have to quarantine now when you come back in the country. If we have a digital ID system where this is the way you get to participate in society and this is a requirement to be considered boosted, that's what will happen. And we do need to address it. We also need to address the 5 million people who are waiting on the NHS with cancer, heart disease and sepsis and strokes and a range of other issues as a consequence of lockdown. So I'm simply saying that there's a lot to deal with. We should be open properly. That's why the Together Declaration has got so many people in the public supporting it. I really think that leaders need to think about, before trying to look like they're doing something good, to consider the cost. You know, the question of us being able to move around freely, we've not even discussed it. No one's provided any evidence of the efficacy for it. And quite frankly, it's an outrage.
But we haven't got COVID. I mean, we've practically... Can I just make one final point?
As long as it is super-duper brief.
At the moment, something to cheer you up.
All right, go on then.
Something to cheer up, that actually I know that you can buy fake vaccine passports for £300.
Oh, well,
so
we
there you are.
we
That
don't
will defeat everything.
We don't advocate that, obviously. Andrew, on the email, has said, bring on COVID passports. Those who choose not to take the vaccine should be ostracised from society. Goodness me, Andrew. Really, genuinely, I really think that people that wish those kind of things, a divided society, need to press pause and have a word with themselves. I really do. Norman has got in touch. I referenced broadcasting from an island somewhere. Norman's got in touch saying, you should send Dewbs on a one-way ticket to an island. She has a big head and we wouldn't miss her. That's nice, Norman. You send me your address and I'll send you a Christmas card. You sound like you like me, really. Anyway, let's move on. Home Secretary Priti Patel says that the suicide bomber who blew up a cab outside a Liverpool hospital on Remembrance Sunday was able to exploit what she calls a dysfunctional asylum system. She's linked the case to a complete merry-go-round system and claimed that a whole industry was diverted to defending the rights of individuals intent on causing harm. 32-year-old Ahmad al-Suwalamin reportedly arrived from the Middle East in 2014 and had an application for asylum rejected the following year, but remained in the UK. Now, I don't want to make it specifically about this one individual, but instead the system generally. And I wonder, Harriet, is the asylum system dysfunctional in this country? This is Harriet Sargent, by the way. Normally, we have nice little name straps on the screen. Today, we do not, so I shall introduce you verbally. Again, just in case you've tuned in. If you have tuned in, you've missed us talking about COVID passports and second jobs already. Where have you been? Anyway, Harriet Sargent, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I wrote a report about the whole asylum system, which meant that I was interviewing asylum seekers, I was shadowing immigration officials, I sat in on interviews, I went to the ports with the immigration officials, and I called my report Welcome to the Asylum, because what I discovered was a complete madhouse. And this was a few years ago, but it doesn't seem as if anything has changed. And the problem is that the young men, it's 70% is young men who are arriving on our shores at a rate of now 1,000 a day, could rise tomorrow. We don't know anything about them. I mean, I sat in on one interview, and it was actually a Chinese person who was claiming that he'd been put in prison and tortured. And at the end of it, I said to the immigration official, well, you know, how are you going to check that story? And he looked at me as if I was crazy. He said, there's no way I can check. Are you imagining that I can telephone a prison in the middle of China and talk to the governor? No, we know nothing. The immigration, the gangs that bring these people over, and let's remember that they are charging £20,000 to carry. I mean, how many people in the UK have enough money to find for £20,000 to pay for asylum if they had to. I mean, this is for middle-class people. I mean, if you're poor, if you're a woman, if you're old, you don't get to come to the UK to claim asylum. But the gangs would actually provide packets of to deal with your papers, so pairs of scissors to cut up your passport and your documents. So you could really make up any story you want. And, you know, these people, they might be saints, they might all be Einsteins, or they might be ideologically driven terrorists. We just don't know. We don't know a thing. We don't even know basic things like what country they come from or even their age. So we have no idea.
Jo Phillips, dysfunctional merry-go-round. Do you agree?
In my understanding, it is the Home Secretary who is in charge of the Home Office. And you would have thought that actually she's been in position for a couple of years now. This government has been in power, the Tories have been in power for 11 years. They've got a walloping great majority. Why haven't they sorted it out? I mean, I don't know when your report was, Harriet, but as you said...
Some years ago.
Some years ago. So this has been going on for some time. So why hasn't the government done anything about it to resolve the problem? The other thing that I would say is I would take issue with Priti Patel because she calls it a merry-go-round. There is a fantastic quote, actually, and I don't know if you're familiar with Nazir Afzal, who was the former Chief Crown Prosecutor for North West England, and he was responsible for getting justice for the girls who were abused by the Rochdale gangs. And he said, you know, lawyers are doing exactly what is expected of them. They test the law in the courts. If the government loses, it's because the law is not correct. So actually, it's down to the government to make it right. Don't blame the lawyers and the judges. And we know what happens when the government takes on the lawyers. You go down a very, very dangerous road, a very dangerous road. The other thing I would say is that there's a report out today from the Refugee Council, which analysed channel crossings and asylum outcomes between January last year and June this year. And they found that 91% of people who travelled across the Channel by boat, so they're, you know, illegal, smuggled, they came from 10 countries and they all applied for asylum. And the report is based on Home Office data.
Alan?
Well, I think it needs a bit of nuance in this conversation, because I think on the one hand, when Priti Patel talks about an industry surrounding it, that's a swipe at people that are pursuing the law and doing what's in place. And I'm not necessarily sure changing the laws. They are quite strict in many instances. But I think there's a much more bigger problem that no one's really addressing, and it is to do with this case, which is why she's made it the point, which is we have someone that's basically a nihilist that's taken on ideas that wants to smash our way of life. Priti Patel herself made the point about, you know, British values. I would argue that the people who are running Britain, the British elite, the establishment, have lost their rudder when it comes to British values. They can't talk about them. There's a whole sense of, well, everything's equally valuable. We're always nervous about being seen as being one thing or another if we assert them. That's one of the biggest problems. So when you've got a terrible nihilist, we want to address the issue of why are some people thinking that they want to attack freedom and democracy, and how do you address that? And one of the issues is that people that are running society themselves don't hold up freedom and democracy quite often, like we're seeing around things like vaccine passports, like we've seen around the right to protest and a range of other issues. So I do think that we need to have a conversation in Britain about what these values are. I would say some of the Enlightenment values around freedom and rights. And I also think that oftentimes, generally, the history of the world, America's a good example of this, and Britain and elsewhere, is that when people come to a country, they generally bring much more of benefit than they do detrimentally. And that's the context I'd understand that. But we need to address these ideas and these actors that are really terrible. And often people don't have the vocabulary to do it. They get scared about calling it what it is. And
British values also play into everything that we talked about at the top of the programme, which was about sleaze, lining your own pocket.
Yeah, but hang on a
trying to
second,
break
there's
the
some
rules.
That's not British
people-
values. I'm sorry. How can you say that?
Well, I'm saying that's absolutely not
That's a
British.
passing thing
No.
that something is being done about. Listen, I've lived in the third world. I've lived in countries
Yes,
where that is
so
normal,
have I.
and it is never addressed. I mean, we have had Boris hauled up into Parliament. I'm not excusing him in any way,
It
but
shouldn't be
look
happening.
at the reaction. But
It
look
shouldn't
at,
be
Of
happening,
course, it
Harriet.
shouldn't happen. But look at the reaction when it does happen. We have a huge furore. We have the Prime Minister grovelling and apologising. I'm sorry, how many countries in the world does that happen?
Yeah,
It
but I
doesn't.
think one of the issues is that we've got leaders now that are scared to say certain things. Some people can't even say what a woman is. They don't want to say it. In education, in the establishment, across society, we're scared to talk about things like history, about values. What are English, what are British values? People get tongue-tied, they get nervous. The point about freedom and democracy and this great project that we've had for the last couple of hundred years, that is an experiment, and in many places we can see they do not exist. If we have these kind of conversations, someone might come along and take you away, is that we need to assert them. And when we have nihilists that do terrible things like this, often people are tongue-tied. And, you know, there's an issue potentially with what's going on with asylum, but there's a much bigger issue, which is how we address with this. And I think we also have to say that David Perry is an absolute hero. One of the things about the public, when they talk about the public in such a disgusting way often, recently with contempt, is that throughout any of these terror attacks, we've seen the public, often around nightlife as it happens, but generally get stuck in, put themselves on the line, take great courage. He thought quickly, he acted bravely, and we should recognise that.
Well, there you go. What do you reckon? Do you think the asylum system is dysfunctional? Phil in Manchester says the same as you, Joe. Priti Patel is complaining about our dysfunctional system, but Phil would like to remind her that she's the one in charge, is paid very well to do the job. Maybe, he goes on to say, that she should resign and give the job to Mr Farage. Phil says in Manchester, Joe said good lord to that. Phil in Manchester said, if I was as bad at my job as she is at hers, I'd be out on my ear, and rightly so. Yeah, maybe she does. Or a third, or a fourth, or a fifth. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about Insulate Britain after 9 protesters were jailed today for up to 6 months. I say, only 9 and only 6 months. Goodness me, I would have slung the lot of them in there for a very long time. Anyway, we'll take a break. We'll be back in a few minutes.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, just before the break, by the way, Alan was mentioning David Perry, who's the taxi driver. Some of you might be aware of that story, obviously, from the hospital at the weekend. I just wanted to make a quick point, by the way, just flag something of interest. David Perry's wife, Rachel, has been quoted as raising concern about some, these crowdfunder things. Apparently, people are raising money for the taxi driver, raising a lot of money, and the wife certainly doesn't know about some of them. So just be careful if you are going to donate, great cause and all that, but just make sure that you are donating to one that is legit, because there's some people out there that will exploit anything to get a few quid in their own pockets. Anyway, let's move on. Insulate Britain. I've got to be honest with you, right? When it comes to Insulate Britain, I've had a bit of a informal policy on this show. I don't like their methods of what they do. Great noble cause and all the rest of it. Who wouldn't want houses properly insulated? But the way that these guys have gone about it, I've completely disapproved of. And actually, what I think is the more the more publicity these guys get for their methods, the more it kind of almost self-perpetuates them to keep going out onto these roads. So I've made a decision recently not to talk about them, but now that some of them have been jailed, I did want to touch on the topic, because nine of the protesters have been jailed today for sentences between 3 and 6 months. And actually, they've been convicted, by the way, of contempt of court. They breached a court order which banned them from blocking the M25 last month. You saw in the news headlines as well, one of the co-leaders has come out being very critical of the government for putting these people in prison. I personally think it was the right thing to do, to put some of these protesters in prison. They have repeatedly broke the law in many cases. They've showed very little remorse. They couldn't care less, quite frankly, about the disruption and the mayhem and the carnage that they have caused to ordinary people. So the fact that some of them are in jail tonight makes me very happy indeed. Not going to lie. Alan Miller.
Well, I think one of the things about this country and society is that we have the right to protest, and that's peaceful protest and engage. And I'm a really big advocate of that and don't think it should be suffocated. I think the problem with what we've been seeing has been going on is that people think that they can't convince people at the level of ideas and campaigning and discussion. So they've wanted to take more what that people would call direct action, and that has interrupted people's daily lives in a significant sense. It stopped some ambulances getting through, it stopped logistics. And that is a couple of things about that. One, I don't think they feel that they can actually win the argument if they do it in a conventional way. You have to do, it's very, like, you have to go out, you have to win the arguments, you have to discuss, you have to argue. That's called democracy and freedom. It's messy. But instead, shutting down things like the M25 and elsewhere, what that does is it doesn't engage with people. It also treats people like they're stupid. You're the issue, you're the enemy, you're the problem with what's going on. And then they were warned about this. So I would always defend the right to protest in a peaceful way, free speech and everything. But this is something different. They've taken it beyond. And we've seen more of this, right? We need to be getting better at discussing things in open with one another, with people we don't agree with, and thrashing out ideas. I'd like them to come and convince people and why they should take a stand and tell their MPs and get everyone to argue for it. Instead, they chose a different route. And I think that at the end, also, a lot of the British public showed what they thought about it as well when they were getting out and moving them and saying, we want to get on with life and society. This is not acceptable.
Yeah, and by the way, some of you might have seen today, I have to laugh because I do, I just think it's laughable, I can't help it. Insulate Britain have basically compared themselves to Martin Luther King and the suffragettes. And Dan on Twitter has said, the suffragettes got women the vote, Martin Luther King advanced equal rights, and Insulate Britain have campaigned for others to pay for their home improvements. Not exactly much of a comparison there, is it, Jo?
No, well, I tend to agree with Alan on this. I mean, it's a noble cause, but it doesn't mean anything to most people. You know, it sort of sounds like a sort of a mishmash of, what is it? Is it some sort of cavity wall insulation? Is it loft lagging? You know, we've had COP26, which we talked about. We've seen the failure, we've seen the disaster. We're all very much aware of climate change and the things that need to be done. But disrupting the lives of ordinary people who are going out to work, you know, often trying to keep things together on very, very low pay, get their kids to school, drive their ambulances to hospital, take sick people to hospital. It doesn't help. It doesn't help their cause. And I'm afraid they come across, well, as Alan said, really, you know, they're not getting their message across. They're just making a spectacle of themselves. So they've actually missed the point.
Well, they're very lucky, actually, that no one got hurt. Harriet, your thoughts?
Well, I do admire people who take a stand and they're ready to go to prison. But
do you?
Yes, I do. But on the other hand, I do feel that they are they're kind of aiming at the wrong target. I mean, the target they should be aiming is, if you look at who is the biggest polluter on the planet, is China. I mean, a third of all emissions are coming from
anywhere
China.
near China, Harriet. They'll get
No,
themselves
but there is a
kicked
lot of
out.
things they could do. I mean, there's a Christian group that stands outside the Chinese embassy 24 hours, 7 days a week to make a protest. They could, I mean, boycotts really changed apartheid in South Africa. They could try a boycott. I just feel the fact that they aren't really trying something serious means that this is actually less about the environment and more about being anti-capitalist.
Do you think it's right they're in prison tonight?
Sorry?
Do you think it's right that some of them are in prison tonight?
Yes, because they're not taking this seriously. I mean, it's too much.
And they broke the injunction.
Yeah, they did. Very quickly, do you think it's right they're in prison tonight, some of them?
Yes, I do.
Do you?
Sadly.
I think, yeah, you make a decision, you know what the consequences are, yes.
I think it's absolutely right. If any of you disagree and think that they shouldn't be there, instead they should be out on a road near you, creating carnage and stopping you getting to where you need to be, then do get in touch and let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Very, very briefly indeed, it's that time of the year, isn't it? Santa's grottos are open. I mean, if you can get in one, good luck. But I wonder, you might have taken your kids there, but would you ever take your dog to go and meet Father Christmas? This is what's on offer at a dog-friendly cafe in Tyne and Weir. It's the only one. Oh, sorry, it's not the only one in the country. I was going to say, it sounds like a... You know what? I've just realised the time, so I'm going to be very brief on this. Have you got a pet? And if you have, would you take him to go see Father Christmas?
I've got a cat, and I would take her everywhere I could.
Would you? You'd pay for your cat to go and see Father Christmas?
Father Christmas.
Good. Alan,
I'd bring her here.
Would you?
I don't have a pet. I don't think I would, but I think that the other Father Christmas with the Tesco thing was a bit of a terrible moment with vaccine passports, so that's a slightly different thing.
Oh, that was idiotic. Harriet, very quickly.
I've got 2 dogs and a cat, which I dote on, but I would do something that they would enjoy. I mean, sitting on Father Christmas's lap is not something my dogs would enjoy. They would enjoy going for a walk. That's what I do with them.
Yes, and presents and treats, I'm sure. Well, that is pretty much all we have got time for. Lots of you still get in touch. I've got to say, I'm not really sure that I found anyone yet that agrees, that Insulate Britain shouldn't be in prison tonight. Pretty much everyone that's getting in touch agrees that they are tonight, at least some of them, where they are supposed to be. Completely agree. Some of you are telling me other things you'd like to do other than put them in prison, but we're nice here at GB News. We don't read stuff like that out. Anyway, Harriet, Alan, Joe, thank you very much for your company tonight. Thank you. And thank you, of course, for your company and for all of your contacts. If there's anything that you want us to be talking about on a future show, do get in touch with me and let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me, of course, at Michelle Dewbs. But that is all for tonight. I shall be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. Nigel Farage is coming up at the top of the hour. But first, let's have a little look at the weather. Have yourself a very good evening. And as I said, I'll see you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. Most of us will stay dry overnight and indeed for much of tomorrow. It's going to be a mild day tomorrow. Overall, fairly cloudy, but where we see some sunshine, well, temperatures could really jump up into the mid-teens. We've got high pressure dominating across much of the UK, but notice these weather fronts close by to the northwest, bringing patchy drizzle to parts of Northern Ireland this evening, and that rain becoming more extensive now across western Scotland, where it's going to be a fairly soggy night and a fairly windy night too. Patchy rain over southwest Scotland, northwest England, mostly over the hills, further south and east. Generally a dry night, and although it will turn quite chilly through this evening under clear skies, temperatures will start to rise as we head towards dawn as mild air moves in. Mild but predominantly cloudy conditions, but we could see some sunshine across parts of eastern England at times, staying dull and soggy across northern Scotland, rain on and off across the Highlands, but elsewhere any rain will be pretty light and Again, mostly over hills across Wales and northwest England. Generally, it's going to be dry but cloudy and mild. Look at these temperatures, 13, 14, maybe 15 degrees if we see some sunny spells across Aberdeenshire. 16 is just about possible too. Now, the mild but fairly soggy conditions will persist across the far northwest, but otherwise it stays largely dry through Thursday night. Maybe a bit of drizzle here and there, again around coast and hills in the west. But generally, that's how we go into Friday, with a lot of clouds, but most places staying dry. Still pretty breezy across northern Britain, with the strongest winds in the far north, where it will stay wet throughout. Again, there we should see some breaks in the cloud across more central and eastern areas, and if we do, temperatures will really get up once more into the mid-teens. 15, 16 is possible, even where it's cloudy. 12 to 13 is above average. Some rain will slip south through the course of the weekend, and that will introduce colder conditions by Sunday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.